Hello, everybody, and we are back at the stage with panel risk management tips. Please welcome Peter Carter-Luke, Karen Skinner, Patrick Kamba. Peter Carter-Luke leads strategically critical investment projects in product supply division of Novo Nordisk. With 25 years experience in project management, Peter brings extensive pharmaceutical project execution experience and understands the interfaces between strategy, tactics, and project execution. As an experienced project executive, he understands the need for building coalitions and ensuring alignment across broad stakeholder landscapes in order to effectively secure project results. Karen Skinner from United Kingdom. Karen has over 20 years of experience with the life science industry, having held numerous senior leadership roles in clinical development, R&D operations, portfolio management, and product development. Karen currently holds the role of head of corporate and portfolio project management at the medical research charity LifeArc, accountable for strategy development and implementation, ensuring effective governance, processes, systems, and resources are applied across the entire company. Patrick from Belgium. Patrick is passionate by people development and training. He's been primarily active as a teacher, then progressively as project management trainer. Job coach and mentor, he likes to help people be and perform at their best. He was director of the project management at GSK Vaccines. He led project managers contributing to vaccines development. He started his own company last summer and is acting now as a program management lead on different bacterial and viral vaccines within Johnson & Johnson. Patrick is an engineer. He has 2 masters from Leeds University in Belgium and has enriched his profile with an MBA from Liverpool University. So welcome, and we start with a slide from Karen. Karen, please, over to you.
Thanks, Peter. And thank you very much for inviting me to join this session. It's a pleasure to be on this panel. So obviously, if we're talking about risk, I'm sure we're going to get into how we identify risks and manage them and control them. And often that's viewed as quite a negative thing that we need to deal with. But I feel like within the industry we're in, within pharma and biotech, like risk is an inherently risky business, and therefore actually thinking about your risk and the level of risk appetite within your company really informs a lot of the decision making that you have. And so being clear on that at the outset, I think it is critical. And so I've just pulled together some examples here that hopefully will resonate with people that are working within this industry in terms of levels of risk appetite, which can go all the way from being completely risk averse to be really open to accepting risk, which I would call hungry. So if you think about projects that you might fill your portfolio with, as I go through these various examples here, it might be in terms of selecting your projects, you will always undertake really robust due diligence on all projects before you initiate them and put a huge amount of effort in that stage. All the way up to, well, actually, you might set criteria, but you might bend the rules a little bit and allow projects into your portfolio that don't accept that criteria. So that would be a kind of hungry risk appetite. In terms of your portfolio balance, if you're really risk averse, you might think, we're just going to operate in a very low risk space. That might be, only doing Me Too projects, working in the generic space, all the way up to, we're going to be working where in a really high risk area where there might be a high unmet need, but there's actually very little literature or validation on this target here, but we will do that because we'll get a high return. And so on and so forth in terms of the project cycles. Will you only invest in short projects that will deliver quickly, or are you willing to take on that bigger risk of long projects? Will you stop your projects just as soon as there's signs that it's not going to work, or actually will you continue to flog that horse and only stop a project if you really prove that it won't succeed? And then also, I mean, there's lots of parameters, but you can think about the skills and the expertise that you have within your company as well, and the level of risk you're prepared to take. So I feel like when you come to manage this, it's quite different at the portfolio level from the project level. Within an individual project, I think you can be clear about the level of risk you might take. And if you just leave that up to the project leader, they're likely to be relatively risk averse because they want to deliver their projects. So they don't want it to be too risky. But actually, if you're managing a whole portfolio, you might be able to think, well, actually, we can balance this. So we might take some risks here if we know we've got some low risk projects that will deliver here. And so I think it's very different, I think, the way that you would approach that when you're managing a whole portfolio. So I just thought that it would be helpful, I think, to discuss and share that with people before we go and talk about the more negative sides of risk and how we control them.
Thank you. You just brought me to a question. I remember once I read that that CEO of HP asked for taking risk, to ask their managers to take some more risk to make more business. Has happened to any of you that you've been in a company that CEO asked to take on more risk, not be so risk averse? Peter, for example, Peter Statley.
Well, yeah, thanks for the question, and thanks for being on the panel.
Welcome.
A few years ago, we had a transition of CEO, and the new CEO has very much embraced a more aggressive approach. And what that has triggered is more research projects, more early contenders for pipeline, where I sit in the production team, basically introduces more projects that generally exist in a much smaller forum. It introduces it in our form much earlier. And that causes a lot of anxiety, one could say, in the production side, because we're usually at a more mature state with product launches than what we're transitioning into. So we have a CEO who's driving a strategy for more agility, faster to market, which pushes the boundaries. So the trick, and I think the key for us, is to accept and embrace that transition to a much more agile environment, and ensure that the processes that are put in place, that were put in place for a previous environment, are adjusted accordingly. I just came from a meeting now which literally deals with this very issue, and I think human nature is to sort of say, wait a minute, this is kind of becoming, we use the term in Danish, we're the cowboys. The structured folks look at the agile folks as a bunch of cowboys. And the trick for project management is to communicate, look, there's a change of boundary conditions, and we need to ensure that the processes that are there for a reason, governance, whatever, can also adjust to this new boundary or frame condition. Or we'll just be bickering about who's the cowboy and who's the conservative. But I think we're all heading into a space with way more agility, which in our world as project professionals translates to structured chaos. The challenge is to use, in my mind, risk as a very good tool for formally identifying where are the tectonic plates moving and how do we address that reality with the very structured governance environment that we all are members of. So yes, we're very much dealing with strategic direction change, which in my world translates to wonderful opportunities. But it could look for the untrained eye like chaos, which it isn't, but it is most certainly running fast.
Okay, thank you.
Your question.
Yes, it did. And was it a business success then, the growth, taking the risk at the end of the day as a project?
So, well, yeah, in a way, because the way production works is that We make a $1 billion, $2 billion decision 2-3 years ahead of a potential FDA approval. That's just the business that we all live in. So, for example, the facility that we've just launched in the US, we invested $2 billion plus US on the hopes of an FDA approval 1 month before construction completion. And it came 6 weeks ahead of construction completion. But by then we had invested the closer, better part of $2 billion. So had we not got that, well, it would have been a different situation. So that's what I find to be the reason why the pharma space is one of the most fun to work in, is that we deal in a risk environment that's only probably higher in the offshore oil industry. So we're at an incredibly high level of risk, which requires incredibly well-prepared professional colleagues, and it's hard. And frankly, I just think it's fun to do something that's hard as opposed to something that's easy. But with it comes a lot of risk management. It's not hard to build an office building. Some people think that's fun. Personally, I think that's boring. It's much more fun to build a very complex, high-risk, high-stakeholder interfaced facility, or for that matter, a drug in the same space. But it does require very, very structured risk management tools. To Karen's fine point.
Thank you. Anything you would like to add, Karen or Patrick?
Well, I was just going to say, absolutely, Peter. And it's almost like if you don't take those risks, you get left behind. So so you do need to do that. You do need to be doing things in parallel. I think it's just a highly competitive area, and
Right.
that path to market is essential. So yeah. So taking those measured risks and being clear about that, you have to do that.
But the trick is we all have governance within our organizations. And the best people at governance are also the ones that might not be the fastest. It's just, maybe it's only here. But the issue is translating why your fast forward motion, in fact, is structured and not just chaos. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think it's the role of the project managers, I think, to bring that visibility, bring those options. It's like, we could do it like this, which would be risk averse, or if you want to move faster and it would look like this. So actually bringing that visibility, being clear, I think, about the risk that you're taking.
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Fully agree with Peter and Karen. Having worked on the development of COVID vaccine, make the impossible possible in a so short time frame. It's really about, as you said, Peter, structured chaos. As PM, you just provide alternatives, options, and evaluate, of course, all the direction and the impact on the direction you could take. But at the end, that is really something. As you said, Peter, you do a lot of things at risk because you have to plan for success and put all the radar and all the rest to be sure that things will happen. But at the end, it's also a matter of commitment, having team align and just share and exchange regularly to be sure that we are on track. That's really it. I like to say that having discussed with one of my friends who is a pilot of aircraft, he said, make an aircraft land, anybody can do it, even my grandmother. I said, yeah, really? He said, yes. Your added value as a pilot is when it's difficult and it's complicated. So the same for here when you have chaos, a lot of pressure, and etc. That's why we are paid for. Our expertise is when you have something really big and complicated to build. Otherwise, you just hire a graduate or a junior.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for your opinions. Let's start with the prepared questions. What are the most relevant risks your organization has faced in complex pharmaceutical projects? Have you observed a trend of risk specific to your organization? Let's start with Karen. What are the most relevant risks for your organization has faced?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult to narrow it down to one area. One of the things I would say is technology moving on. You know, if you don't stay up with the field, you know, we're working in a field where it is evolving all the time. And so actually staying on top of that in terms of technological advances, I think now with data, I mean, if you take the COVID example, the world has changed as a result of COVID. People aren't all going to their GP now and having those face-to-face consultations. A lot of people are doing it online. So that is going to change, I think, the way that healthcare is going to be in the future. Now, with a lot of products on the market, it's almost like, have you got an app to go with that? You know, that'll allow me to, I don't know, you know, using patient-reported outcomes in clinical trials, just monitoring the use of the product out there in the clinic. So all of these things that, you know, you kind of think you started out in this field of science, but actually the advances in data, the advances in digital, the advances in all technology, if you're not staying up with that, again, you get left behind. So again, it's a risk, but it's also a huge opportunity, isn't it? So I certainly see a trend in the area that I'm working in, where we're having to pay specific attention to that. I could give you lots of other examples, but I can see whether Peter and Patrick have examples as well. You're on mute, Peter.
No, not at all. But well, I would say my biggest risk, frankly, is Patrick.
Because really?
He helped Janssen come up with the wonderful COVID vaccine, which is emptying out the entire global market of manufacturers of skids and so forth. So if you're working at the Janssen facility, I used to work there with the team out of J&J. So, jokes aside, for us, the biggest risk right now, frankly, is as much as the world is challenged, our space, as you know, is incredibly overheated. So there's problem in the neighborhood of 20, 30 billion US of capital projects globally going on right now. And for some reason, they all need to be done in Q1 24, which basically means we're all running after the same scarce resources, whether it's engineers, contractors, electricians, welders, any type of professional, and so forth. So that's a significant risk for us right now. That's challenging also very much our governance structures, where we are used to working systematically from left to right. We're now having to work less or from a different systematic right to left in terms of doing what we call backward passes to say, what can we do to avoid the consequences of a completely overheated market? So for us, that's at least from a personal level, one of the ones I'm dealing with at a high level. And then there's always the usual project specifics and so forth. But that one, and certainly I'm watching you, Patrick.
Thank you, Peter. Yes, but to build on the overheating environment, I would like also to flag the challenges for the resources, because people, I would say, potentially are locked down, they have their kids at home and etc., and they still have to deliver as project managers, because we all know that project manager profession is in a way at risk for burnout, exertion, etc., because you have to manage completely different priorities. You are not supposed to have expertise on several completely different topics. And you have 20, 30 project team members to manage and follow. That's really it. And more on that, you have to manage your kids that are playing in just close to you or in the bedroom. And actually, you would have senior management who would tell you, okay, these are new timelines, please make it happen. And you say, but that's impossible. Come on. We have just COVID in less than 1 year, COVID vaccine. So anything is possible now. And you're supposed to cope with this. While actually you may not, because after 1 year, you might start to feel a bit exhausted, or at least. So to me, resources, I would say, overloads, and the fact that, as you said, Peter, we have scarce resources, so you would not have 10,000 of project managers, engineers, clinical developers, etc. So these are all the same resources, but these resources are supposed to finish projects with new timeline that they are receiving from just top down and just make it happen. We know you can happen. You don't have to travel, so it's okay. You have more time now. That was my part.
Thank you. Okay, I think we can go to next question. What risk metrics have you used in the past, use currently for measuring risk management effectiveness in your project portfolio? So let's start with Peter.
I was hoping I could buy some time from Karen.
I can start if you want, but
yeah, go ahead and start, because I'm still reflecting on the question.
well, I think so. But like just the basics of the numbers of risks we've identified, the number of risks that we didn't identify, the number of risks that then became issues, because that is a good indicator. The number of risks that occurred more than once, because I think that's a key thing of actually, did you put in effective risk responses there? You know, sometimes we look at the actual severity that the risk ended up with versus what you projected, to see if you're measuring that impact correctly. The number of risks that you've closed, because actually sometimes people start with their risk register and it goes on forever, you know, and it's you're never closing any of these risks, because again it's inherently there. So I hope that it is good, I think, to go back and check on that. And I suppose the last one is just how much risk management is costing you, but I find that is quite a difficult thing to pin down amongst all the other costs. So those are the kinds of things that we're looking at. I think for me, one of the most important one is the number of risks that actually then became issues. I think that's a good indicator, and then tracking your issues.
And picking up on that, I think one of the things that I like to apply is the timing of the risk, because a lot of times you'll see risk registers, and the things that are listed are things that might or might not mature in additional knowledge in 2 years. So having things ranked in a short and medium and long range, so that it forces a discussion, because what happens is, if you have one of these beautiful grids with a bunch of red ones, all management's going to say is, what are you doing about your red ones? But if you can time scale that and say, here are my red ones in T plus 3 months, T plus 6 months, and T plus 9 months, or 6 months and beyond, then I think you're also creating some sort of a project entry strategy of the risks to say, okay, T plus 3 month risks, we need a real plan. The other ones we might have options, and the other ones are kind of more long range. So it also forces a granularity and the right language around a risk, because otherwise people write risk of not enough resources. Well, that's great. I knew that, but what are you doing about it? Oh, could you please be more granular? Because no one's going to fault you for that one, but you have to be able to say, in this area during these weeks, because we're doing that, there's a risk issue, and then you can do mitigation plans. So I think the one thing I would recommend is timeline for risks, and put them in 3, 6, and 9. 3 months, 6 months, and maybe 9 months, or 6 months and beyond. And then the rest, everyone on this call knows, you know, use risk registers. Make sure you don't put mitigations in your risk. Make sure you formulate your risks in a way that people can understand what they're supposed to do with it. So it's probably as much hygiene around the process than it's the process itself.
Thank you. Mike Myers just mentioned on the chat, risks that have been realized recently on the other projects end up being hot topics for other projects. This may also happen if you have the same resources like you mentioned. And he also mentioned that one of metrics, are people spending as much time on opportunity management as they are spending on the risk? Or do you look quantitatively the potential impact if the risks are realized? Well, sometimes the impact is also has to be measured quantitatively. Okay, thank you. We have a question from Libusha. How do you best cross-share risks, and how do you celebrate smart risk and shared smart failures? Smart risk.
I would say all those risks that you might have in your particular projects need to roll up to a kind of high level overview for the company. And I think that there's a role that project managers play there in terms of then learning from that and learning from each other. You know, you do need to be sharing and spotting a risk in this project, because certainly I think if it's a risk in one area, if you're working in a similar kind of, it will be a learning in another area. So certainly when we have lessons learned at key project stage gates, when we close projects, we take care to kind of look at our risk registers and share that across our teams. And then the smart failures bit, I think that's your culture, isn't it? In terms of actually we're intentionally taking risks here, and so when actually that risk turns into an issue, we're not blaming. I think we're just learning from that. We're accepting that we're taking risks in area, and sometimes it isn't going to work out. So I think that actually being clear about that and being open about that is a positive thing, and to be encouraged. Otherwise, you're not going to take the right risks in the future.
Yes, and if I may say also, in the event, you know, you celebrate a milestone like a study start or whatever, we should also communicate on potentially all the risks that we have mitigated, because at the end, if we start, I would say, a study, if we submit a file to regulatory authorities at the right time and the right moment or as planned, it probably means that some risks have been mitigated. But we sometimes forget that we had some hurdles and we would so much focused on, yes, we did it, that actually we forget that actually we had 23 risks that we mitigated or even avoided. And it's also another way to communicate about risk management.
I really like that point, Patrick, and it reminds me actually of a J&J project I worked on before Novo, which was we were building a plant down in Puerto Rico, and because we had integrated the risk and the schedule and everything into one platform, we instantly realized that the pipe rack manufacturer had resequenced the manufacturing sequence of pipe racks, which kicked our schedule out 3 months. And we didn't understand why until we looked at the data. And what we were able to do is say, if we had not had integrated risk management, it would have taken at least 6 months until we would have realized that mistake. And as a result, we saved millions of dollars buying and selling the risk management process 10 times. So you're absolutely right. Highlighting the avoided risks is probably the biggest mistake anyone that deals in this space does, because we take that for granted. So I really like that point you made.
Okay.
Other thing, to Karen's point, everyone does lessons learned, but let me ask you, for every one of the project kickoffs you've had, how many times have you had a half-day session with the last project manager's lessons learned being the workshop premise? We use that.
Absolutely not enough. You might have a little agenda item, but you're absolutely right.
So lessons learned tend to be kind of one of those, we're done with the project, we're on to the next job. But next job you start out, find that team, invite them, and spend a half a day reflecting on those risks and ensuring that they're baked in, maybe even as opportunities this time. So closing that loop formally with the kickoff sessions, in addition to the lessons learned sessions.
Okay, thank you. So we have 1 minute left. I have 2 last questions. One is from Jacqueline regarding managing risk across projects in a company and rolling up to company level. Do you use any particular software other than Excel? Other than Microsoft Excel, do you use any software to roll up the risk to company level?
In general, we're pretty happy with a tool called PIMS, which was developed out of the North Sea oil industry with Statoil, as they were called back in the day. They actually have a very nice tool for connecting both risks with cost and to some degree with schedule, but certainly with change management. It's still at a project level, but it certainly gives the ability for enterprise risk. So in our journey, we've settled on that tool. We have yet to use it significantly across projects, though.
Okay, thank you. And last questions. Are multiple projects using the same risk contingency budget? are multiple projects using the same budget for contingencies? Or do you have a separate budgets per project?
We have it within a departmental area rather than allocating it within a specific project, just because our projects are quite small, but it might be different if you have a significant undertaking.
Yes, it might depend on escalation route, the way projects are funded and etc. Depending maybe on the impact and the cost, it might be more at the departmental level or even at business unit level. So everything is possible actually.
We have a portfolio volume of X, which we historically never hit because the average of sum of spends generally underspends on the portfolio level. What that means is we have sort of a buffer that can be applied across, but we also have a individual project budget with its respective contingencies. But it's seldom that we have to go, or it's more complex if you want to start using from the portfolio contingency, if you will.
Thank you. Okay, thank you for your insight, for your experience. See you later on other panels, and soon we'll go on with case study transformation program best practice.
Great. Well, nice meeting you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye. Have
See you
a
later.
nice day.
Bye.